establishment which runs a whole set of vested interests, and those vested interests are very greatly challenged by Scotland going off and doing something differently.
Yeah, and they managed to keep the main three parties on the leash. I mean, you said earlier that, just back a bit, you said that they're starting to have a more nuanced argument, but at the same time, they're extremely coordinated. I couldn't help noticing yesterday, I don't know if you saw First Minister's questions, but basically Lamont, Davidson and Rennie all said exactly the same thing, and strangely enough, given our introduction, Kirsty Wark said the same thing again. It was about the European Union. You know, the usual story about, oh, Scotland won't get in. You know that sort of Fox News message of the day thing? And it was the same story, repeat ad nauseum. You need the agreement of all 28 states. That's what you're not saying. Literally all of them. There seems to be some level of coordination now as well that wasn't there before.
Oh, there's always coordination. That's one of the reasons why, when I was saying earlier on that the progressive left, the campaigning left, have taken a grip on Scottish politics. Well, we have. The centre of gravity is moving around us now. If you look at that white paper, it is impossible to read that white paper and not see who's been influencing Scottish politics. So that centre of gravity that's moving around us is partly because the left has got much better at the practices of campaigning, of practice of politics, much more disciplined, much more willing to find compromise, much more willing to try to find ways not to fall out. And that's because it works. Now, the other side have always coordinated. I wrote a while ago in the Scottish Left Review about some of my experience in the Scottish establishment. Now, I worked in the Scottish establishment for 12 years. And one of the things which I always found strange was that they had some transmission mechanism for propaganda, for slogans, for phraseology, which I was clearly not invited to. Because the number of times when I would come in and, you know, in the space of a week, suddenly a whole bunch of members of the Scottish establishment were all using precisely the same phrase to describe something. I kind of thought, well, have you people got a training class somewhere? Do you all go out at night and get told what's the line of the week? But it is just part of this process it's part of the state of having networks, of having these kind of internal built networks where they pass information among themselves and where they come to believe the same thing. It's groupthink. It's how you come to see weapons of mass destruction in an empty desert as a small group permanently talking among itself. But yes, do not ever mistake how coordinated Better Together is. They have nothing to say very much, so what they do is they make sure that everybody says the same small set of things. So I was on the radio the other day debating with somebody from Better Together, and I did it again, and I did it a couple of weeks before. I don't need to debate with these people anymore. I can just read off their briefing sheets. If every conversation I have with someone from Better Together is the same, and every conversation that I have from someone with the Yes campaign is different, and that's a very interesting differential there. So if you talk to somebody in the no side, I know what they're going to recite. In fact, I was on a day out in doing some stuff with some groups in Hamilton, and I bumped into one of the people I was with bumped into someone that they knew. And I'm sitting around a table in a cafe and having some lunch in Hamilton. And I was just chatting to this guy, and this guy was Labour, just like a local Labour activist, but not particularly political, I wouldn't have said. And we were just having a chat about the independence debate. And I could see him. I could see his eyes rolling backwards up and to the left, the recall eyes, the eyes which someone puts on when they're trying to remember what the hell it is they have to say. And I could see that he was trying to recite to me lines that he'd been given in some Labour Party briefing. This is what's happening all the time just now. When you've got nothing to say, it's important that you pick the 3 or 4 messages and keep hammering them over and over. Now, this is the thing why I am partly optimistic about where we are with the campaign, which is a lot of political theory will tell you that that's the right thing to do. But then again, a lot of political theory assumes that the population are morons. And yes, repetition. That works. I mean, again, I was a political strategist for 20 years, and you've got to remember that nothing you say ever sinks in the first time, not the second time. It's probably the 50th or 60th time people start to hear messages that they really start to engage with them. So that is definitely true. However, I would also point out that it's not just the repetition. It's also about the quality and the content of the message that you're repeating. And the problem that Better Together's got is that they're repeating these continuous little snipey, everything's going to be hell questions, little questions that try to suggest everything's screwed up. Now, if you repeat that enough times, repetition can either involve making yourself heard or making yourself a parody. And this is the difficulty. There is no such thing as a single technique that works in political campaigning. The idea that simply pure repetition always works is for the birds. It's not true. That's not how things work. It depends what you repeat and it depends how you repeat it. So yes, there is an enormous degree of coordination among the No campaign. And yes, they are using the same messages all the time. And yes, it gets frustrating. But remember that messages which 6 months ago people were saying the No campaign is being incredibly effective here, now those same messages are taken to be a joke. So there was a while when taking our pandas away was a credible threat to Scotland. Now it's just a joke. Now when you get to the point at which your repetition becomes parody, then your repetition isn't all that effective. Now, this is one of the things I have said from the kickoff, that Better Together are pursuing the right sort of a strategy. They're just doing it with an enormous lack of elegance and grace. There is no sophistication or subtlety. They would argue that, you don't need sophistication and subtlety to win this. Well, I would argue you always need some degree of subtlety. Even if it's just subtlety of thinking, it's part of making sure that you get the right sorts of messages and that you don't become a parody of yourself.
You mean you weren't wowed by the sophistication and subtlety of Alistair Carmichael the other night?
I'm going to say I missed it. I thought you were going to say Alistair Darling for a second. Alistair Darling's got this whole strategy of standing up in the telly and simply saying with a degree of assurance, I'm an expert and I know this is all wrong. Now, personally, I think it's time that people started to remind the Scottish public who Alistair Darling is and what he did. But that self-assured but limited message way of presenting yourself as definitely right, as the voice of authority, that's about all they've got, and it's not going to work forever. But there is a reassuring thing as well in all of this. And this is one thing to remember. Was it just last Saturday? My God, time is just whizzing by here. Last Saturday, the Radical Independence campaign stood and I looked at a room of 1,000 people. Now, nowadays, if you said we're going to have a weekend conference, you'd struggle to get 1,000 people out of the Tories, the Lib Dems and Labour combined. One of the important things to remember is that these parties are dwindling, not only in terms of membership, but in terms of activists. And so if you want to look, there's no question that on the ground, out in the real world, yes, outnumbers No by 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 100 to 1 in some places. And it's a big and genuinely an active campaign. The No campaign is having to act like a federation of smaller political parties simply to be able to compete. So there's this element to which, just as the logic of this campaign has pulled together socialists and trade unionists and feminists and peace movement and Greens and the whole campaigning sector, along with a large chunk of the left of the SNP, and it's formed this group of people into one big coherent, coordinated campaign. Likewise, on the other side, the logic of No has started to mean that, for example, locally here, the former Labour MSP was the guest of honour speaking at the annual Burns Supper of the Conservative and Unionist Party up here. Now, that logic is pulling them together as well. One of the things which I've been saying on our side is the Oliver Wendell Holmes quote, which I love: "A man's mind, when stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions." Now, likewise, this movement's head, now it's been stretched by the thought that we could win, not just the referendum, but the thought that we could win Scotland, that we could win a better Scotland for everybody. That thought has pulled that entire collection of people together, and it's really focused their minds. And like I say, if you go to a local Yes campaign anywhere in Scotland, and I do loads of meetings, if you go to those, I would challenge anybody to be able to point a finger and say, that one's the Green, that one's the Socialist, that one's the Nat, that one's the local activist. You wouldn't be able to do it. They've merged almost seamlessly into this big movement. And the problem is that's happening to some degree at the other side. So the Lib Dems and the Tories and the Labour are more and more able to merge as if they were just one operating unit. The difference is that on our side, we're loving it. Anybody who says this is a nasty campaign a nasty, vicious campaign, I guess you must be on the wrong side. Because where I am, it's a wonderful, fabulous, joyous campaign. There is much hugging in this campaign. I'm travelling all over Scotland, talking to people all over the place. And everywhere I go, it's a wonderful, warm reception. It doesn't matter what the political background of the people that I'm talking to are. Some of them are Tories. And I mean, I've bumped into some right-wing pro-independence people, and they're up shaking my hand and hugging and chatting and talking about the future and what it could be like. It is a wonderful place to be, the yes side. You can't say that from what I've heard from the no side. They will work together, but they don't like each other. They don't go for a pint afterwards. They haven't formed themselves into a unit. And it's another one of those one of those ignorances of modern politics, the belief that since all modern politics, and if you could see me, I'm doing inverted commas here, since all modern politics is a small group of professionals running large professionalised parties according to professional rules, so whether you actually like your party, whether you actually like the other people who are in your side on the movement doesn't matter, well, that orthodoxy is plain wrong. If you can create a big movement that feels strong and good and likes itself and wants to work together, that is worth all the pinstriped strategists wandering about with their lattes that you could possibly want. So this idea that the Yes campaign they're just local activists, they'll go away when this is over. No, they won't. This is not going away. This is not going back into a box. The possibility of creating a different kind of Scotland is so firmly ingrained in so many people's minds now that it doesn't matter what happens in this referendum, it will not go away. There's no legacy in the no side except for a legacy of despair. And I don't mean despair towards us, a legacy of despair towards themselves. They're all talking as if nothing is possible, nothing can be better. And if that's what you pitch yourself as for 2 years, how do you escape? How do you get out? How do you ever come back to a world in which anything is possible again? So this campaign, I believe, is going to damage the no side very fundamentally, just as it has so strengthened the yes side.
Okay, thanks very much, Robin. That's been brilliant. You might even say that we're all working as if we're living in the early days of a better nation.
You might even say we're better together, because we sure as hell are. This is the thing. Yes, Scotland. The lesson of Yes Scotland is we are so much better together, but with ourselves and among ourselves.
Yeah, you might want to couch that as in an independent Scotland.
Even not, this is the important thing is. No, this is the important thing. I'm confident we're going to win. And I do think we're going to win this referendum. And I think all the polling suggests that we're going in the right direction. I think we'll win it. But this is important. Even if we were to lose this referendum, it's still not going back in the box. This social movement is not going to go away. And I'm openly saying, people have said there wouldn't be another independence referendum for a generation. I think it would probably take 5 years. I think if there was a no vote, and the things that are likely to happen at London happen, that we see more of this catastrophe politics, more of the greed, more of the inequalities, and the likelihood that we will be facing another financial crash in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think that a no vote puts anything to bed. I think a yes vote does. I don't think a no vote does. I certainly am not going to wake up if there was a no vote and say, well, that's that then, we lost, let's go back to being neoliberals in a failing economy. I don't think that's going away. Whatever happens now, anything that happens, that campaign that was yes is the centre of Scottish political gravity, and it doesn't matter what happens. It will now start to shape Scotland one way or the other, and that is the legacy of this campaign.
Thanks very much, Robin. That's been brilliant. Speak to you next time.
Okie dokes, just let me know whenever there's anything else you want me to come and do.
So there you have it. Robin's always good value for money. On that subject, these podcasts are free, but we do have to pay our bills, and we're reaching that time of year again where we have to do that. So if you could see your way to helping us out, it's always gratefully received. You can do that on my website, michaelgreenwell.wordpress.com. There's a button on the right. You should try and get along to the Common Real launch party at the Arches on Sunday night. There's a link to that in the podcast blog. So that's us for this episode. There's some good new podcasts coming up. On the Scottish Independence podcast, the guest gets to choose the tune, and a little unusually, for the Common Real launch party, Mogwai actually donated the tune to the Reid Foundation. So here we go with the Mogwai's tune, and it's called New Paths to Helicon. Speak to you next time.